Thomas is excited for this one. He's actually the one who requested this show, but he might not be able to watch it live unless this works. Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube, according to that thing up in the corner. So, and sure enough, so, all right. So we are live on YouTube, I suppose. Let me just paste that and tell everybody that our normal feed is broken due to Big Sur problems. AKA, I'm kind of an idiot. I shouldn't have done that without testing. Well, here's what happened. I'm going to blame Nick because this is how I do life, is I find a way to blame Nick. He hopped into our chat the other day and said, audio hijack works on Big Sur. And so I just figured, cool, I don't have to do anything. And that was wrong. So thanks, Nick. Thanks for nothing. I'm glad it worked for you.
Oh, I'm back, just in case you're wondering. I mean, I'm not like, I just.
There you go.
Yeah, I just.
You look great, Amal. You always look great.
Thank you. You're very sweet.
It's definitely one of those kind of like, you see things that other people wouldn't see because like you're hard on yourself kind of things.
Yeah,
Totally.
thank you.
Yeah.
Very sweet. Yeah.
I totally get it because I do the same thing. I mean, I'm wearing makeup right now because
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to be on.
I would. Yeah, you're gonna be on camera. Yeah, I would love to wear makeup because I just like all of a sudden my face decided to break out. But
maskne is like the worst thing, and when you combine it with like cyclical hormones, it's like you stop wearing a mask for a few days and stay in the house, and then your skin heals, and then the hormones kick in for their next cycle, and then you get over that hormone cycle, and then you go outside again in a mask, and then you start breaking out again, and it's just like.
Yeah, it is perpetual acne with COVID. I would agree. And maskne is totally a thing. Like, it's just
only here. Yeah, it's all along my jawline, which is also where I get the
hormonal stuff.
Yeah. So you can't isolate it to a specific thing. So it's basically like mask and hormones just love fucking up your jaw. Sorry for my French.
Yeah. Just
That's
stop
not French.
Stop. My only thing I have to say is like stop being so like, I don't know, stop doing your job, body.
Yeah.
Like,
stop doing your job, body.
Stop it.
Doesn't our bodies know that we're in a pandemic? I mean, come on.
It's just like there's no need to like
there's no need to do this.
Purge something. Like it's not serving me any purpose. And also, you know, like 20 years ago when you're a teenager and they're like, oh yeah, that's it'll go away. And I'm like, I'm 35. I'm stuck with this for life, clearly until after menopause when, you know, all my hormones drop rock bottom. And then I'll finally have great skin when I'm 55. So
something to look forward to.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the only things to look forward to.
It's not all bad.
Yeah.
Old age.
Perimenopause because
no, I think there's lots of things to look forward to when you're old.
Well, you're already a grandma, Amal, so.
Well, no, drugs are. I am. That's true. But I'm convinced drugs are for old people, though. Like I think I'm looking forward to doing lots of drug lady. You know, I'm very drug free. You know,
That's
but
funny.
like I feel like when I get old, I can just have fun. Yeah.
So in my youth, I had a tobacco habit. About 5 years, not the traditional kind, the chewing tobacco habit, which is way disgusting.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
No
typical,
way.
you know, athlete. Like
You're like
in the
a baseball.
room.
Did you like baseball? Is that why?
I liked all the sports. It was actually football that got me into it. But anyways, pretty addicting stuff. I mean, they put, you know, like razors in there. So it cuts
Very
your,
addicting.
you know, it goes right to your blood. Anyways, hard to stop. I quit. But it was actually an enjoyable part of my life. Like I quit because it was all the drawbacks. Like A, it's gross. B, you might get mouth cancer. C, it gives you heartburn. D, it costs a lot of money. Like there's a lot of reasons to quit, right? But I tell my wife and my friends, I'm like, when I get to like retirement age, like I got nothing to lose at that point. My body's already, you know, deteriorating. I don't care about getting cancer. And hopefully I'll have enough money. I'm just going to start it up again. I'm going to pick it up. Just enjoy it.
That's amazing.
I won't need to have anybody like me, you know. Old people don't care if people like them.
I love that you're.
So that's my game plan.
Wow.
Would you carry like a spittoon?
Your poor wife.
Would I carry a spittoon?
Yeah.
Well, of course. We called them spitters, not spittoons, because we're not from
spitters.
we're not from the
No, but
days
he'll
of yore.
No, but the thing is, when he's older, he can just consolidate, right? Because he can just have his like urine bag
Oh no!
double up as like a spittoon or whatever. Just
That's dry right there. That's how you keep it dry.
Here's my bag of bodily excrements or whatever, excrements. I don't know what the
Just
word
consolidate all of it. You can
It all goes in one place,
Yeah.
anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, just your adult diaper bag and your spit bag.
That's right.
What was good about getting old again? I feel like this is definitely not selling it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I won't have acne, I guess.
Access to drugs and and knowing that like the world eventually going on fire is
right,
something
like
that hopefully
throwing caution
won't be
to the
around
wind,
for exactly.
Like
like you don't have to worry about global warming, if you
or you don't have to worry about like
live
when
that
you're gonna
long
get
and
there.
you're still alive.
Like we're gonna get there eventually. We can go 30 in this 60.
The nihilist episode of JS Party, I see.
Yeah.
Well, let's just change the subject then. Everybody can start their local recordings if they haven't yet.
Yes.
I regret to inform you that I also don't have my soundboard because so we won't have intro music. We're gonna fake it till we start the show.
Do you have backups in case I brain fart again?
Yes, I will record on Zoom the backup. Boom.
Sorry
Thanks for
about
reminding me. And we have an awesome topic. We're gonna have an awesome show. It's not gonna be about bodily excrements, I hope. But who knows?
Okay,
it might get back
recording.
there.
The levels actually look good.
And if anybody has anything to say, and we're running late because of me, so I apologize. But if anybody has any questions or comments on the topic or the flow, segment 3 is merely if we need it.
We're not going to need that.
I don't think we're going to need that. We have lots to say. With 4 of us,
I think all of us are extremely passionate about this topic too, for different reasons. So.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's do a clap real quick, just so it's easy for me to sync later. I'll count to 3. We'll go 1, 2, 3, clap. Ready? 1, 2,
oh, sorry.
3.
I know.
Why don't we clap on 3?
Yeah, on 3 is way better because then you don't have to time it.
I've always been rock, paper, scissors, shoot. That's how I used to do it.
Yes, I am too, but for this, it's not practical.
Well, okay, because Amal will do it at the wrong time. Don't jump the gun, Amal.
On 3.
On 3. So
yeah,
1, 2, clap.
Me. Blame me. Okay.
Was it not you? I feel like it was.
Okay.
1, 2, clap.
Whoa,
did I do it too early or too late?
Behind.
There's a delay.
Okay, I think
there's a delay. There's a delay. My internet is not doing so great.
Note to self: if Amel's talking over us, she's not being rude.
Yeah, that's the thing. Amal's gonna end up. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave lengthy pauses too. Maybe we could all just leave lengthy pauses too.
Yeah, give Amel a chance.
Sure. Yeah. I'm also gonna maybe video mute at some point if it doesn't catch up. I just turned off all my other stuff.
All right, I'm gonna lo-fi theme. I remembered I have it on my phone still. So we used to do
that's
it this
right.
way every
the
time,
backup plan, yeah.
Yeah, backup plan. I'm gonna hold my phone up. Zoom ducks it, so it sucks. But here we go, guys. Game time. Oh, it's on mute. So bad at this. There we go. Can you guys hear it?
Yeah.
All right. Oh yes, the sound of those Breakmaster cylinder beats means it's time once again for JS Party. My name is Jerod. I'm your internet friend, and I'm very happy to have 3 of my internet friends with me. Suze is here. What's up, Suze?
What's up?
JS Party is up, and Amel as well. Howdy, Amel.
Howdy.
And we have Bone Skull here. What is going on, Chris?
What's up, everybody in the house?
Everybody in the house say yeah. Okay, we have a listener request once again. Hey, we're just answering our listener requests left and right lately. So kudos to us.
You're so
I guess.
smart.
Did you know that we take requests? Like any good wedding DJ, or maybe even the bad ones probably take requests. You can head to changelog.com/request. Let us know a guest, a topic, a panelist. In fact, Amal, you were requested this time, my friend. So kudos to you. And we would like to take it up on a future episode. So that's completely free and accessible. And this one was requested by Thomas Eckert, who also happens to be hanging out in the live chat room. So shout out to Thomas. Did you know we record live? Probably because I say it all the time, but I'll say it again. Changelog.com/live every Thursday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. And we can't get the live stream working. We'll even throw it up on YouTube last second because, hey, why not? So Thomas wrote in, and he said, in the latest episode, Amal said Jquery has a well-designed API. I remember you saying that. And he says, I kind of know, I kind of know it when I see it with good API design. This is him talking. But I would love to hear about learnings, mistakes, pitfalls, and guidance for how to make a good API. So the gauntlet has been thrown. We all have opinions on the matter. Some of us are expert API designers. I'm more of an expert API user. I have opinions because I use a lot of them. But we're happy to talk about that in detail. So first up, let's define the term. Let's lay the ground rules. I think a lot of people, when they think API, they immediately go to probably a subset of what the term is applied to, which is usually like a web API or a service. But it's more broad than that. Would anybody like to tackle API, define it, and then talk about the scope of the term?
I nominate Suze.
Seconded.
Well, we can start with what it stands for first, because otherwise that would be bad if we talked for an entire episode saying API. It does not stand for American Petroleum Institute in this case, which I think is an API. It stands for Application Programming Interface, which actually sounds like a mouthful. I guess like being able to describe it in a broad sense, usually I describe it as some software, like a collection of software abstractions that programmers used in order to kind of, you have two sort of contexts of software that need to talk to each other. And for different reasons, you would create an API in order to make it easier or a nicer experience in order to interact with, between those two, I guess, interfaces, to use the word in the definition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's I guess like the most abstract, broad definition you can give it. But, as an example, like Jquery is a library and it provides an API or a programming interface to the DOM in the browser. And what it does is it smooths over and creates consistency across all the browsers. But it also gives you a really nice feeling, enjoyable to use, and sort of, we'll talk about like what makes a good API in another segment, but it just makes it a nicer experience so that you can be much more productive as well. And so I think an API does a lot of different things, and that almost helps define like what it actually is. But then there's other things like, Jerod, you talked about how there are internet web-based APIs that actually link out to external services. And I mean, the two software pieces coming together there are, your particular website needs to speak to another external website in order to do something that external website is way better at doing for you. Right. And instead of doing, instead of having some kind of like awful low level interface to do that, you can provide everything from libraries to HTTP routes, in order for people to communicate with you. So it's really just a communication layer between different pieces of software, I guess. Can anybody do any better than that, given that I was put on the spot?
You mentioned awful low level things. So, but there are awful low level APIs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you have I don't know, maybe you got like some electronics module, like, I don't know, some sort of sensor or something, and maybe it speaks like SPI or something.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to send it a series of bytes back and forth to talk with it, and that sort of thing. And there's an example, I would say, of an API. SPI may be the protocol, but whatever those bytes are that you're sending back and forth, to the module is the programming interface. Likewise, things like, if you're old like me, maybe you remember like modems, where you would call up to a BBS, and the API for your modem was the AT command interface. So
yeah,
they're low-level APIs and high-level APIs.
And I think that's a good point, because when you think about it, SPI is almost like the higher level than the lower level, which would be literally, pushing electrons and bit flipping by hand, right? And so it's interesting how you can get even lower than something like SPI, even though SPI is considered a low level thing. So it's kind of like totals all the way down, I guess, as far as APIs go.
That's like honestly such a good segue to how I kind of interpreted API. And by the way, Suze, your definition was amazing and like perfect, as always. But for me, like, I kind of think of API as like a poke interface, and to kind of,
I love that so much.
Yeah, like a poke interface, right? So it's like the way you are leveraging someone else's code, and it's the way it's like, here, poke my code this way if you want to get this thing, right? So like kind of like a game of Twister, right? But like with your fingers on the keyboard, and you're typing things to make this other thing do a thing, and so it's really a contract. It's like, hey, this is how I'm used. I do all this stuff underneath. I'm an iceberg, and all you see is my tip, like the tip of the iceberg, and you're not looking, you don't know what's underneath. And what's really nice about APIs in general is, right, it's the abstraction, right? So someone or someone's has done the job of this, taking away some piece of complexity and bundling it up, packaging it up into a nice interface for you to poke.
Right.
I love this so much. This is like such a great definition.
Thank you. And so like, and to kind of segue on the like things we're going to talk about a bit later, like a poke interface should have a pretty a perfect intuition or whatever, right? For a user, right? So in the sense that like you should, like, there's a set of typical, I would say, patterns for tools that fall within certain genres. And I think the more alignment there is, like for what a user would expect when using this type of a tool, like the easier it is for a user to like just, for a developer in this case, to just kind of, run with a new tool, right? Because if you're kind of like, the less cryptic, the faster you're able to, like the less cryptic and the less domain knowledge, that you have to attain to use said thing, the faster you're able to move. And so Unix is, I think, for me, best API design like ever. I think like, Unix, and then jQuery as well, right? But like Unix kind of had some very forward thinking stuff when they were like, do one thing and one thing well.
Come on back.
And make things composable and blocks that all into each other. Like, it's kind of amazing, So.
Well, I will add my amen to that. I believe the Unix philosophy makes for it. Yeah, you're just cutting out a little bit. No big deal. Just power through it.
Okay, we have a local recording. So yeah, I mean, so good API is intuitive to use because it generally follows a set of standards that other things have, other tools in that suite have used. But a good API is also interoperable. It's extensible. There's so many things. So, and like, yeah, I have a comment on bit flipping, but I'm going to save that for later.
Let me add a couple of thoughts here real quick. So we talked about high level and low level, networked and maybe like local host, right? The broadness there, maybe the depth, where you can go all the way up the network stack to like an application API. Maybe you're talking about the Stripe API, and you can go all the way down to the hardware and talk about those low level APIs and bit flipping and different things. There's also kind of an inside out way of looking at it. So I joked earlier that I'm more of an API user. But if an API is an interface to your program and you write any sort, and you're a programmer, then you write APIs. So the simplest way to think about it is when you define a function, your function's name plus its external properties, such as the parameters it takes and those types, if it's typed. That's the API. You are designing an API when you write a function. Now, you may be the only consumer of that API. Your own code may be the only one ever consuming it, but it's an API nonetheless. Or when you do like a capital uppercase poke API, like the Stripe API or the GitHub API, you're now writing a very similar thing conceptually. It's just that has way more depth to it and things underneath it. And it's also it's third party. So you're calling into that from somewhere else. So that's why I say it's so broad, because it can go from like, how do I name my functions and how do I accept parameters, to how do I do OAuth, or how do I do REST correctly, or GraphQL, or these kind of decisions. So it really is such a broad thing. So that being said, so Amal kicked off like what we like. So we're going to talk about what makes a good API. And Amal enumerated a couple of characteristics, but she also says an API that she loves, or really a philosophy around APIs, which is the Unix philosophy. We thought it'd be nice to talk about, APIs that we admire or that we think are good, because when you talk about how do you design a good API, a lot of times the way you do something good is by imitation. And you say, I think that thing over there is good. I'm going to do it like that. This is how good authors become good oftentimes. They read a bunch of books and they find authors they admire and they say, ooh, I would like to write as well as this guy or that gal. And we can do that with APIs as well. So what are some APIs that we consider good here on the panel? Not everybody at once.
Oh, I honestly, I think for me, I love the GitHub API, as problematic as maybe some consider it. Like, API is a good example of like how to like structure, just organize your resources. The Jquery API. I used to really like the React. I thought one of the reasons why React really took off initially was it really had a low amount of domain knowledge required to get started with it, right? You like, it just leveraged a lot of JavaScript, and versus something like Angular, which I felt like at the time there was a lot of like cryptic knowledge around like how do you do loops in your templates, in pipes and filters and all this other syntax that you had to learn that was custom to Angular, right? So like low domain knowledge like is good when folks are using your tool. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's so many tools. I can't, like, Stripe has an incredible API, right? So it's usability plus documentation, and like also the way Stripe handles its backwards compat is kind of amazing. Like the fact that like I can't certain companies I've worked at in the past are using actually very old versions of the Stripe API, but it's not that like the company is Stripe isn't maintaining an old version of a package for one company. It's just that they've designed their API to just be backwards compat, at all layers. And that's really, really like very, very good design that really saves the company a lot of money and lets people have enterprise users, so because enterprise people, we know enterprise. One version for life, like that's enterprise, So yeah, I mean, and we have Suze here who can talk all about Stripe. So
absolutely. Chris, what do you think? What are some APIs that you admire, that you appreciate as a user of those?
Well, I don't do a whole lot of work talking with web-based sorts of network APIs. But yeah, I think I agree that much of the GitHub API is pretty good. I often find myself frustrated, like, where is this thing? Well, it turns out the thing hasn't been implemented yet, or maybe it has, but it's not been exposed to the user. And so that's where I just like start to, pound my head on the keyboard, like, but I like, I really like, I like async await a lot, I picked up promises pretty early. I mean, certainly before it was I feel like it was before it was standardized, and I was using Q, right? If you remember that library that had a promise implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so I wrote a whole lot of, thens. And now I do not touch then because I do not have to. And it is very nice. I like using async await and, promise.all if to make sure I don't shoot myself in the foot with it. But yeah, I'm really happy about that one.
That's a good one as well. Suze, anything I'd like to add? Stripe has a pretty good API, but we've
I
covered
can't
that
talk
one.
about that because I would be biased.
Right.
I mean, so
and we've already
just-
said it.
I mean, quick note though, so the first time I used the Stripe API, I was working at Kickstarter because Kickstarter transitioned to using Stripe for payments shortly before I started there. So we still had some work to do with just like making our implementation more robust. And I remember the first time I looked at the Stripe docs, I wasn't expecting a lot just because, sometimes API docs are not the best. And I'm sure that we'll get to this topic very soon too. But I looked at the API docs and I was just so blown away because there were like the little things like, putting your test mode API key in, like embedded in the documentation and things like that, so that the copy paste things just worked and stuff like that. That actually made me say, wow, I would love to work at a company like Stripe who has this attention to detail in their APIs. And so, that is the reason why I'm working at Stripe now, because I had such a good experience with the API. As an engineer, I wanted to be part of improving that even further, which is like really exciting. But to kind of like give a slightly less biased opinion, I've used a ton, and I mean a ton of APIs over probably the last 5 to 10 years. And part of it is just due to hackathons. Part of it is just due to like the nature of my job. I think the biggest standouts for me have been whatever I reach for the most often. So I reach for Twilio all the time because one, their SMS API, because I know they have a billion APIs now, but their SMS API and is just incredibly efficient. It's full featured. It has even Twiml is like a great concept. So whenever I have to create a thing, and it's usually a web page scraper that texts me when something updates, right? That's always what I use Twilio for. I reach for it time and time again because it solves my problems so quickly. It's not that, it's the kind of evil that I know the best. It literally is a good experience. And that's why I reach for it every single time, because it solves my problem really quickly. The other things that I was impressed with when I worked at Microsoft was the cognitive, I can't believe, I only quit like a year and a half ago and I forget what it was called already, but the cognitive,
Are you using
APIs.
Are you using Bing or Google to look up your?
I'm using DuckDuckGo.
Just duck it.
If that tells you what kind of person I am.
Just curious,
Do you duck things or do you go them? I don't know how to verbify that.
Oh yeah.
I think it's just literally cognitive services. Yeah, it's cognitive services. So that you don't have to like create all your bespoke artisanal artificial intelligence models and things like that. So if you want to do some relatively kind of like, cliche things with artificial intelligence, such as computer vision, automatic voice captioning and things like that, they have this huge family of different services, but it's a very nice interface to most of them via REST. So I've been really impressed with how much you can do with just one API call with the cognitive services. So that was always very impressive to me when I worked there. And I thought that was a great example too.
Well, I won't add any because mine have already been said. Y'all stole mine.
I have to say, listen.
But I will talk about a couple of library style APIs. I'm just going to talk right over Amal because she's so out of sync. I will talk about a couple of library APIs. We already mentioned Jquery. I think Jquery's API was brilliant for many reasons, which you can go back to listen to that episode in Ode to Jquery, wherein we enumerate a lot of the reasons why. And therefore, anything that derives from that, Cypress being another one, a lot of tools. I like Mocha's API, by the way, which is really a nice one as well. Chris won't say it. I like BDD style test APIs, like RSpec style. It should do this, it should do that. Those kind of APIs are nice. I come from the Ruby world, and there's some really nice APIs over there. Active Record for Ruby on Rails, which is an ORM, which allows you to manipulate a database in a way that I still think is unparalleled in its ease of access and just doing things from memory and from guess and check. Like you just guess and it does it the way that you want to. Is a nice API to look at if you are looking at developing APIs. But yeah, GitHub, Twitter's API used to be sick. Like I loved it. Now they've kind of bastardized it over the years, much to their shame, I think, and they're trying to recover, sort of, as they treated third-party developers very poorly for a while there, and they're trying to recover that. But trust is easy to ruin and hard to gain back. But their API used to be very solid. GitHub's is really good. I like the REST API. GraphQL, I'm just not totally into it yet, but I hear that's also a good one. Believe it or not, there is some design that has to go into a GraphQL API, even though it is kind of like, pick your own food. You do have to decide what's on the buffet. And we talked about that back on our GraphQL episode where we used a buffet style analogy for GraphQL, which it works once in a while, but also has its faults. Most metaphors fall apart. And most sentences fall apart, and this one's also falling apart. Amal, what you got?
I don't know. I thought that buffet analogy was pretty strong. It's kind of a hard thing to follow,
We beat it to death on that episode. K-Ball
really
latched onto it.
Oh man,
yeah.
I
K-Ball loved it.
Yeah.
You gotta go back and listen to that one.
Yeah,
I could have field day.
I could have.
He did.
Yeah, I could totally
I think that
imagine.
episode's called GraphQL is the bacon to your
K-Ball or something.
Yeah, I can't remember. The
Yeah, no, I can imagine K-Ball like salsa dancing throughout around a buffet, because he's such a good dancer. Have you seen him dance?
He's really good at it.
Impressive. Yeah, very, very impressive. But yeah, no, I think for me, I think just to kind of piggyback off of Suze's comment on Twilio, I would like plus a million that. That's really one of the better APIs because they've just put a lot into ramp up, I would say. And so what's really cool about just tools that, what I think that really invest in onboarding, right? So they kind of think of everything, how can we make this a one click experience, right? Or a one line, add the CDN, start working, so anything tools do to kind of reduce the time to kind of being productive, like reduce the time that you need to be productive, right? So if you need like an hour or more to be productive when you're importing a new tool, like that's in 2020, I would say that's a very low bar, so so you should really aim to kind of get folks productive as quickly as possible, and that's a combination of docs, examples, starter kits. There's many ways to do that, to kind of really round out that number of how many minutes is it going to take for a person to be productive when using my thing, whatever that is. And so, you gotta time is money is time, right, people? So gotta keep it moving.
So the when talking about what makes a good API, for me, I appreciate an API that is at the it finds that sweet spot in terms of the level of abstraction. So when you are using one, for example, maybe you have this API you're talking to and you need to do some certain task. And to do that task, you need to make 4 different function calls, right? But then you switch to this other tool or library and you only have to make one. Now, to me, the one that only requires a single function call probably maybe better understands how its users are trying to use it, right? They've done that research and they say, oh, well, this is a very common use case and we're going to optimize for that. And so I think that's really important when designing an API, is to really know how your users what they want to get done and how they want to do it.
Yeah, You know what, Chris, you bring up a really amazing point, and one that is definitely not lost on me, because you're absolutely right. Like, giving power users the ability to extend and override, whether it's default options or whatever else, is like super key, right? And I'd like to share a philosophy with you that I learned while working on a Scratch project. Scratch, like MIT Scratch programming language for kids and really anybody, but it's very cool. Check it out. We'll link it in the show notes. But Scratch has this really cool philosophy of for how they approach their design, API design, which is they want Scratch to basically have low floors such that, you know, it's easy for anyone to get started. They want it to have wide walls such that anybody, you know, you can do many things with it, but then high ceiling so that like its power users can go as complex as they need to, you know? So the idea is low floors, wide walls, high ceiling. And like, that's just such a, like, that's something that's stuck with me for so many years now. Like, you know, I revisit it all the time. You know, when you're designing something, make it accessible for newbies to be productive right away and make cool things, you know, let people do lots of things with them and with it, and then let power users, like, you know, still like not be shackled, you know, and let them like have the composability and extensibility that they need to do what they need to do. And so it's just such a good point. Like,
it's harder, you know, it's easier said than done though, you know. Frequently because when I'm designing an API, it's generally some sort of library or something like that. And it's really like a tug of war between, okay, how easy should this be or how extensible should this be? And it's really tough to get that right. So
yeah, one thing that I've heard be described, and this was actually the first time I heard of it was someone at Stripe mentioning it, but I'm not sure who the original person was. But this idea of a slow reveal. And so, you know, when you first start using an API or you first start reading the docs for an API, it shows you how to do the thing that you're most likely going to want to do with it. And then because the API has been designed intuitively with what it exposes, like as you want to do more complex things or as you start having corner cases with what you're trying to do, there's this really lovely way that the rest of the API reveals itself to you without you having to learn a ton of stuff right at the beginning if you're just trying to get started with it. And I think that is definitely, in my opinion, one of the hardest problems to solve in API design is trying to find that compromise right there, you know, between power users and beginners, as we've sort of been discussing right now.
I like that, the slow reveal. It makes me think about a swimming pool. You know, maybe you have the shallow end, and they even have the ones where you just walk right in, right, and just kind of go slowly down to 3 feet. And everybody can swim in that side of the pool, the kids, the adults, whomever. It's very accessible, it's achievable, and it's not scary. But then you get like past a certain line, and it may go down to 8 feet, it may go down to 10 feet. You'll have a diving board, you'll have expert apparatus, and that area of the pool is clearly for a different audience, but they can get the exact same access through that shallow end as well. How do you do that though? How do you actually achieve a slow reveal? I think you do have to know your audience to a certain degree first, much like writers have to know who they're writing for. I think API designers have to think, who am I designing this API for? And what does that audience look like, or the best as you can. But how do you like slowly reveal? Do you have to just think like, what's the main thing everyone's going to do and start there?
A really simple version of this. So obviously there's lots of different tactics, but I would say that a really simple example that everyone can understand is having a ton of defaults of the way it operates, and then actually having very smart and intuitive overrides. And so that way you're starting with little, but then when you see how extensible something is, kind of similar to what Chris and Amal were saying, like people who want to then go and extend something, they can easily see, like, jump to that section in the docs, and then the same methods that they were using this entire time actually have this whole next level of things that you can not necessarily leave as default, if that makes sense.
I like that.
Yeah, smart defaults, I think, sort of like can kickstart that kind of slow reveal.
Yeah, and the smart defaults thing is so important because we are not born as experts. Experts are made, you know. Experts are made because experts were beginners at some point, right? One day I was learning JavaScript, you know, right? And so that day is not today. But, you know, thanks to some level of low flooring, I was able to learn, right? And so like you have to keep the door open for folks. And I think one of the things that for me is so lost on many, many, many good tools and libraries in our community is context. We don't often do a good job of setting context for users. Like, what is this tool being used for? Why was it made? What problems is it solving? What's some prior art? Like having all of that stuff like a lot of that stuff is very it's accumulated over time and experience, and but for someone who's brand new to something, that context is really key. And so just like it's very important to also, so between like the good defaults to get new folks ramping up, and not just even new folks, anybody productive right away, right? Webpack did this with like its zero config. Create React App kind of did that. We don't worry about the tooling, just focus on learning the API, right? And really, like I would say it's just there's so much restraint that design makers, API makers, whatever, have to practice in order to kind of keep that floor low. Because one of the things that's really challenging is when you're a maintainer of a project, you have all the context in your head, and you're actually kind of the worst person to write the docs because of that, And so it's a challenging thing. Like it's almost like you need a team of people who are able to mirror and ask you questions and make sure that like you're keeping that floor low, because you need a reality check to keep you honest. It's very challenging as a maintainer to write good docs for people who are new to the tool,
Agreed.
So what are some other aspects that make for good API design? I think one thing that I go back to is that good API design, like actually you can just take the API part out and still most of the rules still apply. Like what is good design? Or you could say what is good software design? Because again, go back to like you're writing a function that you're going to use. You are API designing, right? Whether you think about it like that or not, you are. And then of course you could take the software out and say, well, good design principles apply to good software design. Not one-to-one or not every single one, but generally speaking. So when I think about good design, there are a couple of things that I go back to, a couple of principles and idioms. Solid. Yeah, that's a solid one. The one that I was thinking of, which kind of plays into this conventional idea and into the everyone comes in through the same entrance, but then you can dig deeper, is the idea of the principle of least surprise or principle of least astonishment, where there's sensible defaults, or the configuration is provided for you, what makes sense for most people. And then as you navigate and expand your use of that API, it works the way that you think it's going to work, right? As you explore, you can a great API. GitHub's is like this. Chris says sometimes he gets mad because he tries to find something and it ends up that's not even part of their API, but he probably could have guessed where it was if it was there, right? Like the things are where that you'd expect them to be. And that's the principle of least surprise, is it should work how you think it should work. And that allows people to explore and learn much quicker without constantly referencing the documentation. In fact, if you're trying to bring joy to a user, the best thing you can do for us is make us feel smart. And when I feel smart is when I can just guess where this part of the API is, or oh, how do I do this? Oh, I bet I know how I do this because I understand RESTful APIs. It should live under /users, or it should be I post this to there. And when it is, then you're like, oh, I don't actually need the docs anymore. I figured it out and I can just keep doing what I'm going to do. And so try not to surprise people. Try to put things in obvious, clear places, whether it's endpoints or whether it's function names or whether it's the way you accept arguments. And one of the ways you can be less surprising and less astonishing is to stay consistent. So if you accept a certain parameter to a function and you accept that in multiple functions, always accept it in the same order if it's an ordered thing, right? Like take it first every time. The jQuery again goes back to a very good example of this, right? You can call all these functions and use them pretty much the exact same way. And you find a new function and you're like, I wonder if I could chain this on like I could the other ones. Oh yes, I can do it the exact same way I've been doing everything else. It's not surprising. It's actually obvious. So it's hard to be obvious. We take it for granted when it's there, but to come up with the obvious solution is difficult. That's why it's called design. And it makes me think of a book which is very famous in the design world called it's called Don't Make Me Think, I believe. And it's like, one of these books that everybody buys. I've never read it because I already got what I think from the title. I already know I already get, which is a great design of a title. I already know what he's going to say, and I completely agree with him. I'm sure there's tons of good details in there. But a good API doesn't make you think, or at least tries its best to be consistent and not surprise you. And I think that's one aspect of a good API.
Wow. Yeah. I would say that book really targets its audience, doesn't it? Like, oh, you open the book and it's actually just blank pages, empty book.
Yeah, could be. Bestseller.
Yeah.
It's a bestseller.
No, Jerod, you had some like amazing points, and really like the whole thing of like, just don't do something unpredictable, right? Like, and solid helps you kind of align to that, solid principles. But and do one thing well, and just I think keeping things modular, and don't throw curveballs at people that are like, don't name a function get blah 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 and then have that function be actually doing a mutation or a post. Like, naming also like is a way to signal like what this thing is supposed to do. But you know what, I kind of want to take it back a little bit, because I can't believe no one brought up Git, because Git for me is like one of my favorite APIs. I love Git. I'm like a power user. I have reached the point in my Git foo where it's like, I'm not afraid of like looking at my ref log, or I'm not afraid of complex merges or whatever. Like, it's fine. I rebase all the time. I squash whatever, I just, it's because the API is just so good. And one of the reasons why it's also so good is because, you just get man, and like, you can see the docs right there in your terminal. You don't have to like context switch, you can, what flag was this thing, or how do I do this thing? Like, the docs are right there. And I think like it's very hard to beat that. It's very hard to beat like that experience of not having to leave your terminal while you're learning, like learning something and using an API and not having to, it's very hard to beat. And like, I don't know.
I'm going to diverge on this one, because I like
TypeScript
Git
allows
as a
that, I
tool.
think, too,
I think it's very powerful, but I don't
like it.
find its API.
I'm on Jerod's side here.
Its interface was very difficult. I do know it now, and I do think it's powerful, and I appreciate what it does.
Yeah.
So I think technologically, it's spectacular, and the fact that the man pages and everything have gotten a lot better, and everything is right there at your fingertips. So I'm with you on all those points.
Yeah,
I think the actual like command line interface, which is an interface, is
it's hard to learn.
Once you learn it, it's kind of like Stockholm syndrome. But for me, at least, it was hard for me to pick up.
Yeah, there's no slow reveal. There's no consistency in flags.
That's very true, actually.
There just isn't, like, it almost feels like every context within Git is like this completely separate story you have to learn. Like, it feels like it's a bunch of tools thrown in together to kind of achieve the one goal you have, which is distributed versioning. It doesn't actually feel like, like, it's amazing how just I use it on a daily basis, and still every time I delete a tag, or rename a branch, they're the two things that I get wrong every single time, because they're different between the different commands with the flags.
Yeah. I have to concede to all of you, because I think you're right. I think I'm confusing my love of the tool and what it does with the ease of use. And you're absolutely right. It did take me a number of years to get to where I am. Right. And it wasn't easy. And I think you're right. So I'm gonna walk that back. Okay. I was wrong. Use is right. I think you're right. But it's interesting though, isn't it? Like, imagine a world where everyone could become an expert in Git like within a month. Like, imagine that world. That would be a different world, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like GitHub is kind of interestingly bridging that gap a little bit with all of their UI. Like, I don't know if most people realize this, but I'm going to maybe blow your mind. Pull requests aren't a thing inside of Git. Does everybody know that? Does anyone know that like pull requests aren't a thing? Like, so if you go to projects like Mozilla and Chromium and all these things
And
are
Linux too. Actually.
Linux.
yeah.
They use patches. They're
They
literally
email each other patches.
emailing each other files. Okay, like some of the most important projects in the world are not on Git, but even if they
Well, they're on
were
Git,
like,
but
well,
they're
no,
not on
sorry,
GitHub.
they're not on GitHub. Sorry. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for correcting that. So, it's just funny. It's like it is what it is. Webkit is not on Git, by the way. I think unless that's changed in the past like 2 years, I don't know.
Well, there was a long time where there was
they use
Mercurial versus
Subversion.
Git, and Git was not the de facto. It was like they
Yes.
had to battle it out, kind of like VHS and Betamax.
Right.
And Mercurial's kind of gone the route of Betamax, but it still has its constituents for sure.
Right,
And I think
right.
I think Mercurial actually has a better API, interface. I don't know if it's a programming
interesting.
interface, but at least the command line interface is
Yeah.
way more approachable, which is one of the reasons why people liked it. But
That's
GitHub
interesting.
really mitigated that.
Yeah, but GitHub, but isn't it interesting though that like GitHub just I feel like it just really bridged the gap in so many ways with like confusion on the terminal and what you can do, and right, like now you can even like suggest comments in line in a pull request, and you can actually like say like, hey, here's a suggested change, and someone can accept it, and so essentially you're kind of abstracting away people's need to ever use a terminal between that and then their GitHub UI. So I don't know. So basically I think the lesson for you here, kids, is if you build a bad API, someone is going to build an abstraction around you and make lots of money.
Layer.
Yeah, and make lots of money. Really, because even at NPM, I mean, like there's so many things with NPM that were like missing or not there, and mainly because the team was like under-resourced and had so many other things to do, right? But the community built all these things around NPM that should have actually been in NPM. For example, bundle phobia or unpackage, or you know what I mean? There's so many features that like would be great to just be in NPM directly, but people had to build abstractions around it because it wasn't supported, with the NPM API. And so Yarn even, right? Like workspaces wasn't a thing. And so we're going to build an abstraction around our connection to the registry. And, so it's so just lesson learned, like if you're not solving it well, someone else is going to solve it better and faster. So just
That's a great point.
Keep that in mind. There's actual commercial value here, like if you're doing B2B stuff or if you're doing this for profits, So,
yeah.
So yeah.
So Amal, you mentioned solid, and I think we should probably just lay out what that is. So those are a set of really object-oriented programming design principles which have been formalized in books and courses and stuff. And there's 5 principles there. I don't know them all because I don't write good code. But single responsibility, I know open close. The L, I don't know. It's like somebody's name.
Yeah.
Liskov
substitution principle. Yeah.
There you go. Dependency inversion is another one. So these are all good things to learn and to apply in any sort of software design, specifically object-oriented software, which a lot of times if you think about an API, it's a lot like an object, right? It's kind of a black box that you access via the way it exposes itself, and you don't care how it works behind the scenes. So it's very much an object-oriented thing, but that's that. We'll link up the Wikipedia page as a starting place. It's a deep dive into solid, but it's definitely something you should be familiar with.
I like that you brought up, like, people shouldn't have to be able to care about like how you've implemented it and things like that, because I think the thing that gets my goat the most about badly designed APIs is when you can feel the limitations that the software engineers who designed the API were running into, and you can feel that they've pushed that work back onto you. And they've leaked, like, it's called like implementation leakage, like they've basically made something harder for the user when the user should never have had to care about it in the first place, because you ran into a specific limitation that isn't even relevant, to having to limit the library, if that makes sense. And that sounds like very abstract, so I can give an example if.
Please do, yeah, because I'm trying to think of one and I can't.
It's really hard to think of it. Actually, I have 2 examples. So I'll cover React at first. So thing that annoys me about React is that when you have a loop and you're iterating and you're spitting out things like based on an array or a map and you're returning components, you have to give it a key attribute, right? And it bucks at you if you don't do that. That is not something that should ever have to be necessary, in my opinion, in an API. You should not have to actually give a numeric key in order for React to be able to do its thing properly. It has no bearing on your app at all. You'll probably never ever use it. And so warning you that you didn't do it and forcing you to when you're not even going to use it in the first place, I think that's implementation leakage.
That's a really good point. I've always just been annoyed by that, but I thought it was just me. So I'm glad you've actually like empowered me to complain more. Like that's, why do I gotta pass that to you all the time? It's such a pain.
It's really annoying. And another example is like having to use class name instead of class. That's literally implementation leakage. And I actually really don't like working with React and think there are better options out there for these reasons. But again, that's not like, let's not do a turf war. One concrete example that I can talk about that happened in open source for me with Stripe was we released official types for the Node.js client library recently because there was like a definitely typed community contribution, and then we actually put in a type definition into our actual library. We honestly wanted to, we knew that this was going to be something that we would have to maintain going forward, and we wanted to know how expensive it would be to maintain, and we wanted to know, just how much attention to give it, right? So we really wanted to know who's actually using types in this library versus not using types. We just want to see like, what's the word you use to see when we want to see utilization, essentially. There's a better word for it, but yeah.
Adoption.
That's the word. Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
So we didn't really have a good way of being able to see that in the telemetry and track that. So we, there was a property that was introduced where if you wanted to use the TypeScript types, when you instantiated the library, you needed to specify a property that was TypeScript true, right? And when I saw this, like I immediately burst into flames because it's just implementation leakage is like the hill that I die on at all times. And so I saw it and I just said, hey, I'm just curious, what's this property about? What was the technical limitation where someone can't just use the types out of the box? And they said, well, we actually just want to know through telemetry, if they set that, then we know they're using it. And so we've made it a mandatory property just so that we can get accurate adoption statistics. And it's really just for the user so that we know if we can give more resources to it, and we can argue for more resources at work to maintain it. So it was actually in the spirit of actually helping the user, but also having them specify that it's just not an idiomatic thing that you should have to do with TypeScript. It felt weird. And sure enough, we got people on Twitter asking about it. And so we had a big conversation about it. We were like, okay, so is it really that important that we know adoption? And can we really just commit to actually maintaining this, right? And can we maybe talk to users after a while to just see what the adoption actually is in other ways? And so we ended up pulling the plug and we completely removed that property that same day and released it. And I felt that was a huge win. But it is really interesting how quickly you can just leak one property and then, it kind of opens the gate for other leakage as well. So.
Yeah. Wow. It's almost like, I wish you could lint that. Wouldn't that be cool if you could like automate it? It's like, where it's like, hey, am I leaking my implementation details? Like, yes or no?
It seems like a nuanced thing because I feel like
very nuanced.
I feel like I can sense that as somebody who's just used a lot of APIs, but I've never been able to verbalize it like you do. Like maybe you have a superpower for like, that's leakage right there. Because I don't know if I'd actually identify something as leakage, even though I can probably know, I could point it out in retrospect, like, yeah, that was that. So it seems like a nuanced thing to be able to actually determine, like, this is an implementation detail, not something that's, should be on the external side of your API.
Yeah, but in all fairness, though, Suze, like you brought up such a good point about the React class name, because there's really like all of the deviations between JSX and HTML could have easily been abstracted and handled by the compiler. Like there's no reason to like expose that to the user, and like confuse them and or confuse designers who maybe are co-working with you, and you know what I mean? So I think that's like such a good point. And I think it was from my understanding, like the React team like that's just a decision they can't easily go back on right now. But like if they could
exactly.
if they could do it differently, they would at this point.
Yes.
But it's just, you know, but yeah, I also think like this is why it's important to have a diverse team designing an API, right? To kind of bring it back to like empathy, because you have blind spots as an engineer, no matter how good you are, you know, always you have blind spots. And so having people validate your work, use it, make sure it works for their use cases, and hopefully having those people maybe not be like you, whether it's demographically, you know, whether it's they're working on a different thing, whether, you know, just like diversity in all factors counts here. It's just someone that's not you, ideally, you know?
Right.
So, yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but we have not covered one of the mainstays of APIs and good APIs is documentation. We've talked about it as we revered certain APIs. We talked about their docs. And I will say that Stripe gets a lot of credit here because they did come out with great API docs, web-based, readable things with all of the little details, which has since been emulated and repeated elsewhere. So we're thankful for that, but Stripe doesn't stand out quite like it used to. But that's because everybody basically copied that and like, oh, this is great. You know, you have to give respect to the ones who changed the game. You know, this is why Michael Jordan will always be the greatest basketball player, because he actually invented all the things that these guys now do. That's a hill I'll die on. But, you know, Stripe really did that. So like a lot of the things that you see, like having the curl commands or like the 4 different languages that you can just like click your language and see what the call looks like in your language. Stripe invented a lot of those ideas and it was amazing. But thankfully, it's gone across the industry now a lot, especially businesses that run APIs have good docs. But again, to go to the APIs in the small, right, your functions, your packages, your modules, your libraries, these things are all APIs. And even if they adhere to these principles like least surprise, uniform access pattern, like all these things, still you have to describe what's going on, folks. So you can't just leave us out there to figure it out ourselves. We need help. That's like the core of accessibility, is like telling people about your API. So
wait,
docs
Jerod,
have to be there. What makes them good?
Wait a second. Wait. Hold on, Jerod. Are you trying to say that my code isn't good enough for you? Like reading my code isn't just intuitive enough for you? Like it's just too much work or something? Like why do I need to put this into like English text when you can just read the code, dude?
Not your code, Amal. Yours is fine. Yours is great.
Yeah. No, I for anybody who maybe that bad joke was lost on, that was definitely not a true statement from me. But yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth between like, do I need to put comments in my docs or in my code or not? You know, it's tough. It's because there's comments and documentation that like is like an application is very different than a library, right? Because a library, for example, or a tool that's publicly facing or whatever, like there's version management and all kinds of stuff that's a little more baked in, and it's, you know, application code is, I don't know, that's tough. It's a tough one. I don't know. What do you think, Chris? Like, I want to hear from Mocha Man. Mocha Man.
Mocha
Actually,
Man.
has anybody ever called you Mocha Man? I want to be a Mocha Man.
I like it.
Okay, Suze is literally falling off her chair.
This is the greatest moment in JS Party, in my opinion.
Wait, no. I think the greatest moment is going to be hearing his reaction to being called Mocha Man. Go for it, Mocha Man.
I'm going to have to ignore that. So what was it was...
I told you. I want to be...
Comments and stuff. Okay, so like I tend to comment. I comment my code a lot because I think I'm probably not that good, and so my code is not self-documenting like the geniuses, you know, who write self-documenting code. And so what I write in the comments tends to be, this is my intent for what I'm trying to do here.
Right.
I mean, it's useless if you know, it's just explaining what the code does.
You're doing or what you're doing, but why. Yeah,
and exactly. As soon as you go and change that code and you don't update the comment, then the comment's out of sync with the code, and it's just horrible. And so, but I think it's really important for if you're writing code that somebody else is going to come along and try to read and understand, is to make sure that your intent is clear. Because, you know, I don't know if you've heard of, have you heard of Chesterton's fence? Right? It's like
No.
I don't even know where it came from, but I know it's like a thing on Wikipedia where it's like, okay, there's a fence out in the middle of the road, and someone comes along and says, hey, why is this fence in the road? Let's tear it down. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then, I don't know, the moral of the story, skip ahead, is that, you know, you shouldn't remove the fence if you don't know why it's there.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, like,
it's there for a reason, even though you don't know what it is, right?
Right. And so I don't want to write code where it's not clear why it's there, because that's like the worst thing if you're in the business of like maintaining software long term, is to have this code that you're afraid to touch because you don't know what really the intent was in that bit of code. And so I feel like comments from you know, on that level. But if we're talking like user-facing APIs, I try to use doc strings, and I try to auto-generate API documentation for my libraries whenever I can. You know, I'll try to provide type declarations, though I don't write TypeScript. I mean, I think it's necessary for even the most simple and small libraries. Like if you look at any of Sindre Sorhus's libraries out there, they're all tiny, but they all have documentation, they all have typings, and they're all consistent. So you know that, oh, if I want the sync version of this thing, I'm gonna hit the .sync function, right? And so I think it's really important to have that good documentation in place. Just like, I don't know, it just seems like you got to have it. It's basic. So
Mocha Man, just kidding. I'm gonna stop now. Okay, maybe one more time. Just kidding. No, I won't. Okay. So Chris.
Yes.
I don't know what's coming next. I'm scared. So
nobody has mentioned yet the importance of tests as a communication of intent and documentation as well. Like, I feel like tests really can document your code as well as like the like intent and whatever else. So I think, like, you know, one of the many benefits of tests is that they serve as a point of documentation. So you know, write tests, people. Like, and tests are first class. They're not if for production code, first class. I'm sorry. Like,
it's like a thing you don't see a lot in JS. It's because I think the community and the culture hasn't really picked up on it. But if you look at an ecosystem like Rust, like all the API documentation, they're really big on automatic API documentation in Rust, and that's cool. There's, you know, other shortcomings in the documentation, but like having these tests present, and that's like part of the maybe I'm not even thinking of the right thing, but it's essentially like assertions are part of the documentation, and you can look at the code sample, and the code sample is a test, and it makes an assertion about the result of you know, your API call, and you can copy and paste that and just run it. And I think that's great. I think that's something that I would hope to see more of in JavaScript. But you know, we don't do it here. And I mean, JavaScript's more about the kind of free form README instead of these really strict API docs. In Rust, every crate has these API docs, but not in JavaScript, which is too bad.
I will add my amen to that. We did an entire episode on docs. Safia led it. It was really good. We did a deep dive. Obviously, we're not going to do a deep dive right now. That's episode 50 of JS Party, hosted by Safia Abdallah. Chris, you were on that show. I was on that show, so surely we said things that were interesting. I don't remember them. Maybe I should go back and listen as well. But if you want more on documentation, definitely check out episode 50. We're running short on time. Any final thoughts on APIs? What makes them good? What makes them bad? Etc. before we call it a day?
It's okay to provide a low-level API if you are clear about who you're directing that.
Yeah.
If you're clear about who your audience is, and so
That's a good point.
there are tools out there that are really low level, and people probably shouldn't be using directly, but they are anyway because there's no reasonable abstraction like yet around them. I can think of a few in JavaScript, so. But, I mean, it's okay to do that, but yeah, you don't have to make no library you make has to be like totally high level, all the way to low level. You don't have to do this slow reveal, depending on the scope of what you're trying to provide users.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny actually. The fetch API, like Java, fetch like FE, I'm not going to spell it. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So the fetch API was actually designed as a low-level API that was supposed to be for library authors and whatnot, similar to like typed arrays and atomics and shared array buffer and blah, 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 blah. All these other low-level APIs that like, maybe the average web developer is like, IDK, what do I do with this? They're designed to be used by libraries, that create abstractions that are useful for developers to use. But Fetch was it was a really big surprise when community started adopting Fetch like at scale. And so, that's interesting how that worked out. But I don't see much use of typed array buffer, shared array buffer, or anything else. Like, I don't think too many people are using things like that are low level. But
I tried to use it a couple days ago. It was unusable.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's like we said earlier, good API design is a hard thing, So.
There's also a lot of constraints in software, so
sure.
We talk about ideals a lot because, of course, we're not going to talk about things that are kind of good, right? Like we're talking about what it could be the best. But we know that as we go out and build things, that the real world hits up against our ideals, and we have to make trade-offs. And so sometimes you have to suffer your API design or the purity or the principles, right? They have to suffer at the behest of the amount of time you have to spend on this, the amount of money you have to spend on this, the team, right? Your own knowledge, because one of the things we know is that we don't know everything. And so I'll know more later is pretty much the way I live my life. And so as you're designing your API, you may think you have designed the best thing you can do until 6 months later when it hits the real world. And you realize that design doesn't actually hold up. So one thing we can tend to do as software developers is get stuck in the paradox of choice, right? And the analysis paralysis, and just not ever get that API done because we want it to be perfect. But you actually do have to move things forward. And so you may not be able to design the perfect API today, and you may never get to that perfect point, but you design what you know and you ship it, and then you find out more once people start using it. So don't forget that as well. Anything else, Suze? Final words before we call it a show?
Yeah, I wanted to actually share an article that was, again, sorry to plug Stripe, but we have this magazine that we
this
put
episode
out
brought to you by. No,
yeah, we should talk about a deal here.
Yeah, we should.
So Stripe puts out a magazine called Increment Magazine, and our latest issue is actually about APIs. So it's very
amazing
to this episode. All of the articles are really, really, really good. Oh, yep.
Yeah,
I'm a subscriber to the Increment Magazine.
I read it on the internet. I should subscribe. I didn't know you could do that. I just
it's so
read
cool. There's a print edition like that. I just
yeah,
want to support
they only
that.
just started distributing the print edition, so it's
oh
a
wow.
Thing. Yeah.
Well.
But one article I want to call out, because this is almost like a sort of a futures segue to take us out, is there is an article in that specific edition called "How Should We Build the APIs Tomorrow?" And it's by my colleague Toma, and it just talks about the fact that because we use computers and services at a rapidly kind of evolving pace, we're starting to find that, a lot of things that we've talked about today on what makes a good API and how to write one might actually start limiting us too much in these compromises that we're making, given how many people are coming online and the different sort of even networking challenges we're seeing with that. So I think that it's a great read because it just talks about the fact that we're sort of starting to hit a ceiling, and maybe we should be letting go of some of the status quo around how we do APIs now, and like what we should sort of rebuild, in order to kind of get to the next level being better at this kind of thing. So I really loved the article. It was a really satisfying read. And even though it doesn't answer a lot of the questions that it poses, that's kind of on us, you know, as a developer community in general, to start kind of trying to think outside the box a little bit. So I just thought it was a really great one to inspire people to think beyond what we currently do with APIs.
Wow.
Sounds awesome.
I'm inspired just thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely will need to check that out.
Seriously.
Listeners, all the links to all the things mentioned on the show will be in your show notes. You know where those are. They are there for your easy click. And definitely check out that article. Check out some of the other things mentioned. That's our time for this week. That's our show. Hey, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. We'll talk to you next time.
Pow, 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 pow.
All right.
All
I don't have
right.
my outro music,
Okay, so
this is the
Suze, seriously, that was so freaking inspiring. I totally agree. Like, anytime you try to design like anything accessible, right? Like, or progressive, for instance, like you have an if-else branch, or you have some logic in your code that just throws this monkey wrench into the situation, you know? And so by adhering to these standards and ideals, you're kind of also not able to serve all as easily. And, you know, that is something like, yeah, I mean, you have to have like a foot in multiple universes, you know, like so that you can really support people who are coming in through all kinds of devices, who have different kinds of internet access, you know, like access to internet, high-speed internet. And, you know, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I almost wonder if like you should handle this problem like a distributed system, so that like, you know, Twitter, for example, like, you know, they optimize for high traffic or whatever popular people differently than they do like everybody else, you know? And so ultimately, like you're able to build your application for the 80%, and then for the 20% or 10%, you have a whole different code path for them, so that you're not tainting, you know, the 80% use case with the 20% monkey wrenches, you know? And so I almost wonder if that's the kind of approach that we should take to solve this problem. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very, very, like, very cool. Also, the bit flip thing, I totally forgot about that. The bit flip thing came up for me recently because as we're designing smaller and smaller processors and microchips and whatever, we've greatly increased the number of like the probability for bit flipping. And just so it's interesting.
Oh, you're talking about like almost like bit right from a bit right perspective. Yeah.
Yes. You know, so like, yeah. So there's more bugs in our
too. I mean,
yeah. The better our hardware, quote unquote, the more likely they are, more bug prone they are, essentially.
Yeah, we're just fighting physics at this point.
We're fighting physics at this point. Yes, like the number of bit flips on average are like just infinitely quadrupled or whatever, you know, with these tiny little chips. So versus like, you know, if you didn't want that accident, like, you know, like the redundancy problem, right? The software redundancies, all the redundancies are there to kind of, you know, so an airplane has like 3 versions of the software running and they all check each other, and that's just because of bit flipping and like things that go wrong in that regard, you know? It's crazy. Yes, that too. So I don't know. It's interesting. We should have a whole show about that in the future, but Suze as guest, hopefully, like, because I think, you know, you're Suze as guest host or whatever the hell, because that's like, I think it's your jam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, good show, everybody. We're going to say goodbye to our live listeners. Thanks for hanging out. If you're watching on YouTube, hey, this was an accident. We don't normally do video, but maybe we'll do it because it was so easy. I just hit one button and boom, we're on YouTube. I don't know. It's amazing. They must have an awesome API. I don't know.
They do actually have a nice experience.
YouTube does.
I did test out live streaming on YouTube once, and I was like, wow, this is nice.
Speaking of live stream, when are you going to go rogue, Suze? Have you gone rogue yet? Or you're not talking about that either?
I gotta run.
Okay, bye, Amal.
Bye, team. Bye.
I turned off subscriptions on Twitch this last couple of weeks.
Okay, so you're on your way.
So I'm not an affiliate anymore, which just makes it easier for me to get off the platform. And also, like, that's partially why I'm trying to get off the platform. I don't want people to have to pay for emotes. I think that's fucking stupid. So I just kind of turned off that because, yeah, there's a lot of different reasons why I needed to. So
yeah.
Also, you know, for reasons why I'm leaving the podcast.
Right.
the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, I'm actually hoping I have time to push that platform just like over the edge where I have enough tests to cover the chat portion of it.
Yeah.
And then we should be good. Like, it's actually a working platform.
I've been
but
eagerly
I just
awaiting
haven't
your
had
announcement
it
because I
tested
figured
at
it was
scale,
coming
right?
soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause it's cool. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to people in your space.
I'm
right?
excited about it because there's a lot of different things that I'm doing differently than how I normally do. For example, I'm keeping it closed sourced and it's just for me. And yeah, I'm just trying to like lead by example with this project. So it's become very political for me. So I'm pretty excited about getting it out because I still strongly believe in it. It's just, taking a while.
Awesome. Well, definitely keep me in the loop because I'm excited about it as well. All right.
I got to drop too.
Yep.
So
We'll say goodbye. Don't forget to upload your file.
bye, Suze.